By the time I reached my front yard, two strangers were carrying my late wife's cedar chest down the porch steps, like it was nothing more than an old box. That chest had sat at the foot of our bed for 38 years. And my son-in-law was standing beside the moving truck holding a clipboard. 3 hours earlier, I had been sitting inside First County Bank with a blue pen in my hand and my daughter Emily beside me. At 60 years old, I thought I had seen enough of life to recognize trouble before it reached my front door. I was wrong. I was there to sign papers for a small home equity loan. Nothing reckless, nothing fancy. Just enough to help Emily and her husband Mark get through what they called a rough patch with their little flooring business. Emily was my only child. After her mother passed, I suppose I started saying yes too easily. A father tells himself he is helping, not enabling. The loan officer, Mrs. Patterson, was explaining the final page when my phone buzzed. It was my neighbor, Mrs. Whitaker. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. "Frank," she said, her voice shaking, "are you moving?" I frowned. "Moving, no. I'm at the bank with Emily." There was a pause. Then her voice dropped to a whisper. "Then why is someone loading your furniture into a moving truck?" The room seemed to tilt. I slowly turned toward Emily. Her face had gone stiff, as if every drop of blood had drained beneath her skin. Then she looked past me, straight at Mark. And Mark froze. Not confused, not surprised. Caught. I stood up so fast the chair scraped against the tile. Mrs. Patterson stopped talking mid-sentence. "What's going on?" I asked. Emily opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Mark forced a laugh. "Frank, let's not overreact. It's probably just what I said." He looked down at the polished conference table. That was when I knew. I didn't sign another page. I told Mrs. Patterson I needed to leave, grabbed my coat, and drove home with my hands locked around the steering wheel. When I turned onto my street, I saw the truck before I saw the house. The back door was open. My life was being loaded inside. I slammed the truck into park before the engine had fully stopped. For a second, I simply sat there staring through the windshield. The moving truck was backed into my driveway. The garage door stood open. Boxes lined the sidewalk. Two men in blue uniforms carried my dining room chairs toward the truck, while another wrapped my late wife's china cabinet in thick moving blankets. It looked organized. Professional. Planned. Nothing about it resembled a burglary. I climbed out of my pickup and hurried across the lawn. "Hey," I shouted, "what do you think you're doing?" The nearest mover set the chair down and looked genuinely confused. "Sir, this is my house." The crew leader walked over carrying a clipboard. "Mr. Frank Dawson?" "Yes." He smiled politely. "Perfect. We were told you'd be here a little later." I felt my stomach tighten. "What are you talking about?" He flipped through several pages before handing me the clipboard. "We're moving everything to a storage facility while the property is prepared." Prepared. I looked at the paperwork. My address, my phone number, my name, and what looked like my signature. Only, it wasn't mine. I had signed thousands of documents during 40 years working as a maintenance supervisor for the county school district. I knew my own handwriting. Someone had copied it. "Who hired you?" I asked. The crew leader pointed toward the bottom of the contract. "Mr. Mark Reynolds, my son-in-law." Before I could say another word, a silver SUV pulled into the driveway. Emily stepped out first. She wouldn't look at me. Mark came around the driver's side wearing the same forced smile he'd tried back at the bank. "Frank," he began, "this isn't what it looks like." "I'd love to hear what it does look like." He took a slow breath. "We're putting everything into climate-controlled storage for a few weeks." "Why?" "The house needs work." "What work?" He hesitated. "The foundation. My foundation passed inspection 6 months ago." He blinked. I meant the plumbing. The plumbing was replaced 2 years ago." Every answer he gave created another hole. The crew leader quietly signaled his men to stop working. The neighborhood had begun to notice. Mrs. Whitaker stood across the street pretending to water flowers that had already been watered twice. Another neighbor stepped onto his porch. Curtains moved. Everyone knew something was wrong. Emily finally spoke. "Dad," her voice cracked, "I wanted to tell you." "Tell me what?" She looked at Mark before answering. He gave the smallest shake of his head. That tiny movement said more than any words could. Someone wasn't just hiding something. Someone was controlling the conversation. I turned back to the crew leader. "Nobody touches another box." He nodded immediately. "No problem, sir." Then he lowered his voice. "I think there's something else you should know." He reached into the truck and pulled out a folder. On the tab in thick black marker were 4 words that made my blood run cold. The bold black letters on the folder seemed to swallow every other sound around me. "Property sale documents." For a long moment I couldn't move. The crew leader looked uncomfortable. "I wasn't trying to pry," he said quietly. But when you told me you didn't know about this, I figured you should see it. He handed me the folder. Inside were copies of a listing agreement, a property disclosure statement, and a moving schedule. Every page carried what appeared to be my signature. Every one of them was fake. I felt my pulse pounding in my temples. Mark stepped forward. Frank, let me explain. You've had plenty of chances to explain. It's not what you're thinking. I looked him straight in the eye. Then tell me what I'm supposed to be thinking. He glanced toward Emily again. She stared at the ground. Finally, he sighed. We were only trying to help. I almost laughed. By selling my house? No, he snapped. By getting it ready. For what? He hesitated just a second too long. Emily finally found her voice. Dad, we wanted to renovate it first. Renovate? She nodded too quickly. It'll increase the value. I never asked anyone to renovate my house. It was supposed to be a surprise. I looked around. Half my furniture sat inside a moving truck. Plastic wrap covered my wife's china cabinet. My father's old workbench had already been strapped against the wall. Nothing about this looked like a surprise. It looked like an operation. I closed the folder and walked slowly into the house. The living room echoed. Family photographs had disappeared from the walls. The sofa was gone. Even the old quilt my wife had sewn 40 years earlier had vanished. The house no longer felt like home. It felt staged. I opened the kitchen cabinets. Half were empty. Bedrooms stood stripped bare. Someone had been packing for hours. Not minutes, hours. Mrs. Whitaker quietly stepped inside through the open front door. I didn't know whether to call the police, she whispered. You did the right thing by calling me. She leaned closer. Frank, this didn't start today. I turned toward her. What do you mean? I've seen people coming here all week. My heart skipped. What people? A photographer. She counted on her fingers. Then a cleaning crew. Yesterday there were two couples walking through the house. I frowned. Walking through? They looked like buyers. Every muscle in my body tightened. Buyers. No one hires photographers, deep cleans a house, and shows strangers around unless it's already on the market. I slowly turned toward Mark. His confidence was gone. Emily had begun crying silently. Without another word, I took out my phone. Instead of calling the police, I called the oldest friend I had left, a real estate attorney. If someone had tried to steal my home, I wanted the truth before I wanted revenge. I reached David Morrison's office less than an hour later. David and I had known each other for over 30 years. We met when our sons played Little League together. His son had moved to Colorado years ago, while Emily remained the closest thing he had to family nearby. When I walked in carrying the folder, he took one look at my face and canceled his next appointment. Sit down, he said. I handed him the documents without saying a word. He adjusted his reading glasses and began flipping through the pages. The room grew painfully quiet. Every few pages, he stopped to study another signature. Finally, he leaned back. Frank, I already knew the answer. Those aren't mine. No. He slid one document beside another. This one is your signature from your will. Then he placed the listing agreement next to it. And this one was copied by someone who practiced. He pointed at several tiny differences. The pressure on the final letter, the spacing, the way the capital F curved. They did a decent job, David admitted. But it's still a forgery. I felt sick. So what happens now? First, nobody can legally sell your house with forged documents. I finally exhaled. But there was always a but. That doesn't mean someone wasn't trying. He picked up the listing agreement again. This wasn't thrown together yesterday. He spread several papers across his desk. Look here. The moving contract had been signed 12 days earlier. The home photography appointment had taken place 8 days ago. Professional cleaning had been scheduled 6 days ago. The online listing agreement was dated 4 days ago. Everything had happened while I believed Emily and Mark were simply struggling to keep their business alive. This was planned, I whispered. David nodded. Carefully. I stared at the timeline. Every date represented another lie. Family dinners, Sunday phone calls, Emily stopping by with homemade soup, Mark offering to mow my lawn. All while they were quietly preparing to sell the house I'd spent 36 years paying off. David interrupted my thoughts. I want to check something. He opened his computer and logged into the local multiple listing service. A few moments later, the listing appeared. There it was. My home. The same front porch where my wife and I drank coffee every Saturday morning. The maple tree I planted when Emily was 5. The swing I built with my own hands. Every room had been professionally photographed. The description praised the well-maintained family residence in move-in ready condition. The asking price was nearly $200,000 higher than what I'd imagined it was worth. Then one sentence caught David's attention. He leaned closer to the screen. Frank, What? The seller isn't listed as you. A chill ran through me. Then who is? David slowly turned the monitor toward me. I recognized the name immediately. It wasn't Mark. It wasn't Emily. It belonged to someone I had trusted almost as much as my own family. The name on the listing belonged to Karen Ellis. For a second, it didn't even register. Karen wasn't a stranger. She had been Emily's best friend since high school. After college, she became a licensed real estate agent. She had sold homes all over the county and built a reputation for being honest and dependable. I'd trusted her enough to hand her the spare key to my house more than once whenever Emily needed to stop by while I was traveling. David looked at me. You know her. I nodded slowly. I've known her for 25 years. He frowned. Then either she's the victim of a very elaborate lie, he paused, or she's part of it. I wanted to reject the thought immediately. Karen had attended my wife's funeral. She had cried beside Emily. She had even helped organize the reception afterward. There had to be another explanation. David clicked through the listing history. Interesting. What? The property was listed this morning. The same morning I came to the bank. Exactly. He printed several pages. I think somebody expected today's loan closing to happen first. I looked at him. What does my loan have to do with selling my house? David tapped the loan estimate I had brought from the bank. You were refinancing? Yes. The new loan would have paid off the remaining balance on your existing mortgage. I felt my stomach sink. Once the old mortgage disappeared, the title would be cleaner. The sale would become much easier to close. I had walked into the bank believing I was helping my daughter through a difficult season. Instead, someone had timed everything around my signature. David leaned back. Frank, I need you to answer one question honestly. Go ahead. Who knew you were coming to the bank today? I didn't even have to think. Emily. And Mark. No one else. My banker, of course. David folded his hands. Then whoever organized this had inside information. The room fell silent. I stared out the office window. Memories came rushing back. Over the past few months, Mark had suddenly become unusually helpful. He insisted on driving me to doctor's appointments. He offered to organize my paperwork. He even volunteered to store copies of my financial records in his home office, just in case. At the time, I'd thought he was trying to be the son I never had. Now every kind gesture felt rehearsed. Every favor carried a hidden purpose. David interrupted my thoughts again. I've already sent a notice to freeze any pending transaction involving your property. Can they still sell it? Not legally. But, he sighed, if buyers have already made offers, this is going to become very messy. Just then my phone buzzed. It was Emily. I almost ignored it. Instead, I answered. She wasn't crying anymore. She sounded terrified. Dad! Before she could continue, I heard Mark yelling in the background. Then the line suddenly went dead. Emily didn't answer when I called back. Neither did Mark. I tried again. Straight to voicemail. David watched me quietly from across his desk. What happened? I don't know. I slipped the phone into my pocket, but an uneasy feeling settled deep in my chest. That wasn't an argument I'd heard in the background. It sounded like panic. I need to go, I said. David stood and walked me to the door. I've already contacted the title company and the listing broker. Nothing can move forward today. What about the police? They'll have their turn. But before this becomes a criminal case, you need to know exactly who did what. I nodded. He was right. If Emily had simply made terrible decisions, I wanted to know. If she'd been manipulated, I needed to know that too. I drove straight to Emily's house. Her SUV sat in the driveway. Mark's pickup was gone. Emily answered the door after nearly a minute. Her eyes were swollen. Mascara streaked her cheeks. She looked exhausted. Dad, I came to hear the truth. She stepped aside without saying a word. The house was unusually quiet. The television was off. The kitchen table was covered with unopened bills, past due notices, credit card statements, medical invoices, a foreclosure warning addressed to their business. I slowly picked one up. The balance was nearly $70,000. Emily buried her face in her hands. I never wanted you to see this. Then why didn't you tell me? We thought we could fix it. She nodded. At first, I sat across from her. When did this start? Almost a year ago. She explained that their flooring business had lost 2 large commercial contracts within the same month. Cash flow disappeared almost overnight. Then the truck engine failed. Suppliers demanded payment. Employees quit. Every month became a race to survive the next one. I listened without interrupting. None of that explained my house. Emily wiped away another tear. Mark said we only needed one big sale to recover. What kind of sale? She couldn't answer. Instead, she opened a desk drawer and handed me a thin envelope. Inside were statements from 3 online investment accounts. Every one of them had been emptied. He said he was investing, I asked. She nodded. He promised he'd double the money. The losses totaled more than $200,000. I stared at the pages. This wasn't investing. Emily lowered her head. I know. It was gambling. Fresh tears rolled down her face. I didn't know how bad it was until it was too late. And my house. She closed her eyes. He said if we sold it quietly, we'd pay everything back before you ever found out. The words hit me harder than I expected. Not because they were cruel, because somewhere along the way, my daughter had actually believed him. Before I could respond, someone pounded violently on the front door. Emily looked up in terror. Her lips trembled. Dad, please don't let him in. The pounding grew louder. Not polite, not patient. 3 hard blows rattled the front door. Emily instinctively stepped behind me. At 60, I wasn't looking for a fight anymore. Those days were long behind me. But I also wasn't about to let my frightened daughter face whatever waited on the other side of that door alone. I opened it. Mark stood there, breathing hard. The moment he saw me, he stopped. I need to talk to Emily. You can talk right here. His jaw tightened. This is between my wife and me. No, I replied evenly. It became my business the moment you forged my name. His face lost color. I didn't forge anything. You expect me to believe that? He looked toward Emily. Honey, tell him. She couldn't. She simply shook her head. That silence told me more than any confession. Mark rubbed both hands over his face. This has gotten completely out of control. It was out of control the day you hired movers. I was trying to save us. By stealing my house, I wasn't stealing it. His voice cracked for the first time. I was going to buy it back. Neither Emily nor I said a word. He kept talking. The market's hot. We could have sold it, paid every debt, then bought another place for you later. I stared at him. You planned my future without asking me. I planned to protect everyone. Emily finally spoke. No, Mark. Her voice was barely above a whisper. You planned to protect yourself. He turned toward her. I did this for us. No. She shook her head again. You did it because you couldn't admit you had lost everything. The room fell silent. After nearly a minute, Mark slowly sat down on the edge of the sofa. His shoulders collapsed. I never meant for it to go this far. That was the first honest sentence I'd heard from him. He admitted the investments weren't bad luck. He had become addicted to chasing bigger returns. Every loss convinced him that one more deal would fix everything. Instead, each gamble dug the hole deeper. When the banks stopped lending, when family members refused to help, he convinced himself my house was the only answer. Emily covered her face. I begged him to stop. I know you did, he answered quietly. But every time I looked at those bills, he looked at me. I couldn't accept failure. I understood that feeling. Most men my age have stared failure in the face at least once. Losing a job, losing a business, losing someone they love. But there is a difference between failing and deciding another person should pay the price. I picked up my phone. I'm calling the police. Mark didn't argue. He didn't run. He simply nodded. I suppose this was always how it would end. 20 minutes later, 2 detectives arrived. As they began asking questions, one of them turned to me. Mr. Dawson, we're also investigating 2 other forged property files. I looked at him. What do they have to do with mine? He opened a folder. The same real estate agent handled all 3. The detective's words caught me completely off guard. The same real estate agent handled all 3. For a moment, I couldn't even speak. You mean Karen? I finally asked. He nodded. We're not saying she's guilty, but her name appears on several transactions we're reviewing. My heart sank. Karen had known Emily since they were teenagers. She had spent countless holidays at our table. If she was involved, this wasn't just fraud. It was betrayal from someone I had considered family. The detectives separated everyone into different rooms. Emily stayed in the kitchen with a female detective. Mark remained in the living room. I sat at the dining table answering questions I'd never imagined hearing. When did you last give anyone access to your house? Who knew where you kept your financial records? Did anyone ever ask you to sign blank documents? Each answer painted a clearer picture. Months earlier, Mark had offered to organize my paperwork after I complained about forgetting where I'd filed things. He scanned insurance policies, property tax records, mortgage statements, even copies of my driver's license. At the time, I thought he was helping an aging father-in-law. Now I realized he had been collecting everything he needed. One detective quietly shook his head. We've seen scams like this before, but usually strangers do them. Family cases are the hardest. 2 days later, David called me with unexpected news. Karen wants to meet. What? She says she has information. Against my better judgment, I agreed. We met in David's conference room. Karen looked nothing like the confident realtor I had known. She hadn't slept. Her eyes were red. Before anyone spoke, she placed a thick envelope on the table. "I'm sorry, Frank." I didn't answer. She pushed the envelope toward me. Inside were emails, text messages, draft contracts, bank transfers, everything. Mark had told her I was downsizing voluntarily after taking out a home equity loan. He claimed I wanted the sale handled quietly before moving into a retirement community closer to Emily. "He showed me documents with your signature," Karen whispered. I believed him. David interrupted. "Then why didn't you verify it with Frank?" Karen lowered her head. "Because Mark said Frank wanted it kept private until everything was finalized." She paused. "I should have called." "Yes," I answered. "You should have." She nodded through tears. "I've already surrendered every document to the investigators." David carefully reviewed the files. Then he looked at me. "This changes everything." The emails clearly showed Karen had been misled. More importantly, they also revealed something else. Mark hadn't acted alone. Several forged signatures had been created on the same home computer, including one that wasn't Mark's. The forensic report identified a second person who had typed, edited, and submitted the documents. I stared at the name on the report. It wasn't Karen. It wasn't Emily. It was someone none of us had expected. Mark's older brother. A paralegal. The investigation moved much faster than I expected. Within 2 weeks, detectives had pieced together the entire scheme. Mark's older brother Daniel wasn't just a paralegal. He specialized in preparing legal documents for a small law office. He wasn't licensed to practice law himself, but he knew exactly what paperwork looked convincing and exactly where to find the information needed to create it. According to investigators, Daniel never planned to sell my house himself. He simply believed he was helping his younger brother borrow time. That decision would cost him his career. Mark accepted responsibility almost immediately. Daniel didn't. He insisted he had only prepared documents. "I never forced anyone to sign them," he argued. "But you created them," the prosecutor replied. "And you knew the signatures weren't genuine." Eventually, both men accepted plea agreements rather than face trial. Mark received a prison sentence for fraud, forgery, and attempted real estate theft. Daniel lost his job, permanently surrendered his paralegal certification, and received probation along with substantial financial penalties because of his cooperation. Justice, I discovered, doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like ordinary people quietly accepting the consequences of their own decisions. Emily filed for divorce less than a month later. She didn't ask me to rescue her. She didn't ask for money. Instead, she found a modest apartment across town and accepted a bookkeeping job with a local construction company. The salary wasn't impressive, but every paycheck belonged to honest work. One Saturday morning, she knocked on my front door carrying a toolbox. "I thought I'd fix the porch railing," she said. "It always bothered Mom." Neither of us mentioned everything that had happened. We simply worked. For 3 hours, we sanded old wood, replaced loose boards, and repainted the railing together. It reminded me of the Saturdays when she was 12 years old, following me around with a tiny hammer that weighed almost as much as her arm. Trust didn't return that afternoon. It returned little by little. One repaired railing, one shared meal, one honest conversation at a time. Several months later, Mrs. Whitaker walked across the street carrying 2 slices of homemade apple pie. She smiled. "It's nice seeing your lights on every evening again." I smiled back. "It feels nice being home again." As I watched Emily laughing with Mrs. Whitaker on the front porch, I realized something I hadn't understood during all those painful months. My daughter had made terrible choices, but the worst decision of her life did not have to become the definition of the rest of her life. People deserve accountability. But when accountability is followed by genuine change, they also deserve the opportunity to rebuild. For the first time in a very long while, it finally felt like our family had begun doing exactly that. The first quiet Christmas after everything happened felt different. Not because the house looked the same. It didn't. Some of my wife's favorite antiques were never recovered. A few family photographs had disappeared forever. The cedar chest that had started this nightmare came back scratched and cracked along one corner. But the house was alive again. Emily arrived early that morning carrying a casserole she had made herself. No expensive gifts. No grand speeches. Just breakfast. As she set the dish on the kitchen counter, she looked around the room. "I still expect Mom to walk in sometimes." I smiled. "So do I." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Silence used to make me uncomfortable. Now it reminded me that healing doesn't always happen through words. Sometimes it happens simply because 2 people choose not to walk away from each other. After breakfast, Emily handed me a small wrapped package. I found this while cleaning out my apartment. Inside was my wife's handwritten recipe book. I'd assumed it had been lost during the move. I carefully turned the yellowed pages. Flower stains, coffee rings, little notes she'd written to herself 30 years earlier. Frank likes extra cinnamon. I had to stop reading. Emily reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I'm sorry, Dad. This time I believed her completely. Not because she cried, not because she apologized. Because for months, every action she'd taken had matched her words. She had rebuilt trust one honest decision at a time. Later that afternoon, we walked onto the front porch. Mrs. Whitaker waved from across the street. So she called, smiling, planning on moving anytime soon. Emily looked at me nervously. For one brief second, we both remembered that phone call. Then I laughed. The first real laugh I'd had in nearly a year. No, I answered. I think I've finally found where I belong. As the sun began to set behind the maple tree I planted, when Emily was 5 years old, I realized something my parents had spent their entire lives trying to teach me. A house can be repaired. Money can be earned again. Even broken trust given enough honesty and time can slowly heal. But character is built one decision at a time. And when life becomes difficult, those small decisions reveal who we truly are. If this story reminded you of someone you love or reminded you that forgiveness and accountability can exist together, I hope you'll share it with someone who may need to hear it. And if you enjoy stories about family resilience and second chances, I'd be honored if you subscribed and joined me for the next one. Until then, take care of the people who matter most, because they are worth far more than anything money can ever buy.